Nico Harrison is no longer employed by the Dallas Mavericks, and the same might soon be true for Anthony Davis as well. I did a whole Mavs video a full day before Nico Harrison actually got fired. The one thing I didn't talk about in that video, though, was actual, tangible Anthony Davis trades. I think it's realistic to expect now that they have moved on from the architect of the Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis trade that they now try and continue to separate themselves from that disaster by trading away Anthony Davis and thus building around Cooper Flag. And when I thought about this, and I thought about, okay, what are some teams that would come to mind? My first thought genuinely was the San Antonio Spurs, because they are always at the top of my list when it comes to win now kind of moves. We talked about them with Lauri Markkanen. Obviously, they added De'Aaron Fox last year, and Anthony Davis, for whatever you think about him, would improve the championship contention status of the San Antonio Spurs this season, depending on what they gave up. And in my opinion, anytime you are getting a healthy Victor Wembanyama season, which this appears to be so, knock on wood, you have to capitalize on that because that puts you in a position to contend at the top of the Western Conference. And there's two ways in which the Spurs can go about making this move. The first would be trading Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, some of these bigger salaries. A couple of other guys like Kelly Olynyk would have to be involved, and a couple of picks or whatever compensation makes sense to Dallas. And San Antonio can keep their core guys and just get rid of a bunch of these middling salaries. The problem with that approach for San Antonio is they're good to start the year, and that's like half of your rotation for a guy that's played like 14 of the last 50 games he's been eligible to play in the NBA because he's been hurt so much. So if you do that, trade for AD, then he gets hurt, all of a sudden you're missing like half of your rotation. But that's one of the issues with AD trades in general, is trying to match his salary in one way or another. And so that would be, although not a super realistic option for San Antonio, it would be the first option. The second and potentially more interesting option would be De'Aaron Fox. If you're not going to include the Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, trading half the rotation plan, then De'Aaron Fox has to be in the deal. He's the only other big salary they have that would actually make sense in this context. And so you could theoretically do De'Aaron Fox, Keldon Johnson for Anthony Davis. Super simple. No picks, no nothing. Just, hey, Dallas, you need someone desperately in the backcourt. He's younger than Anthony Davis. He can grow alongside Cooper Flag because that's the guy you're trying to build around. That's the end of the trade. And you can still kind of compete in the near term if that's what you want to do, because you've got guys in the front court, presuming they're healthy, and Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, that can just slide into that spot that Anthony Davis no longer occupies. You got De'Aaron Fox in the backcourt. It's a nice middle ground between not completely giving up on the season, but also getting some kind of asset in exchange for Anthony Davis. And I think that's a pretty good asset to get in exchange for AD, given where his value is at this point with the injury stuff, with the contract, and in his early 30s. The problem is, does San Antonio agree with that? Do they agree, one, that it is worth going semi all in on a often injury prone Anthony Davis? And two, do they think that they have enough guard help after trading away De'Aaron Fox to fulfill the promise of potentially competing at the top of the Western Conference, which, as I mentioned, is the entire point of trading for Anthony Davis? Dylan Harper, very good. Steph Castle, very good. Are they good enough to compete at the top of the West, even with Wemby and AD in the front court, and what would be a very, very fun front court to watch when healthy? To me, those are massive, massive question marks. And so in either of those scenarios, whether it be De'Aaron Fox or trading away half the rotation, neither of those are realistic to me for San Antonio, even though they were the first team I thought of. However, there is another trade construction that involves San Antonio, but they're not getting Anthony Davis. They are getting Rudy Gobert, and the Timberwolves are getting Anthony Davis, where the Mavs are getting Keldon Johnson, Kelly Olynyk, Mike Conley, basically just contracts, plus Rob Dillingham and 2 first-round picks. I think the place to start here would be Minnesota. This obviously is a massive shakeup to their roster. You are trading Rudy Gobert, Rob Dillingham, and a pick in exchange for Anthony Davis. And I don't need to keep mentioning it, but I will one last time here. The injury stuff is a massive concern. And if you trade for him and then he doesn't play, you just basically got rid of a starter in Rudy Gobert, one of your potentially up-and-coming bench guys, Rob Dillingham, and a pick for nothing if Anthony Davis doesn't play. And I understand that. But the concept for Minnesota would be, if AD plays and he's healthy, he's better than Rudy Gobert, elevates your ceiling this season and gives you a really, really nice running mate alongside of Naz Reid, Julius Randle, Anthony Edwards, Dante DiVincenzo, a really, really interesting mix of guys to potentially compete at the top of the conference. And again, even though it was stupid, this is a guy that was traded for Luka, whatever it was, 9 months ago, 10 months ago. And so there is still a lot of on-court value to Anthony Davis if he actually plays. San Antonio would do kind of an in-the-middle move of what I just mentioned, where Gobert's easier to trade for because he only makes like mid-30s per year. It's only for the next couple of seasons, which lines up pretty nicely with like the Wemby extension, the Steph Castle extension. Gobert's contract will basically be gone by the time those extensions kick in. So financially, they definitely can make this work. And it doesn't prevent them from making future moves. You'd still have De'Aaron Fox, Dylan Harper, Steph Castle, Wembanyama, Harrison Barnes, like Rudy Gobert. You'd still have most of your rotation, which makes it a little bit easier to continue to make moves. And obviously there's the French connection there with Gobert and Wemby in the front court. And for Dallas, you're getting Dillingham, a couple of picks, you're getting salary relief. And although that might not sound super exciting compared to what you traded for Anthony Davis, that's something you just have to remove yourself from. That concept is gone. You traded away Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis, and you're not getting anything remotely close to that level of value back. It is a sunk cost. You need to remove yourself from that mindset and think about what we can do to build around Cooper Flagg, and getting Rob Dillingham, a couple of picks and flexibility would be potentially a good option in Dallas. Those are all of my Spurs ideas, and then obviously Minnesota thrown in there as well. Another team that's been brought up a lot here is the Atlanta Hawks. There's two different trade constructions here you could look at. One would be essentially just upgrading the Kristaps Porzingis spot. You could trade KP, a couple of other contracts, maybe a pick or two in exchange for Anthony Davis. And then you've got Trae Young when he comes back from injury, Jalen Johnson, Dyson Daniels, Risa Shea, and then Anthony Davis. And again, some of the optimism from that was around Atlanta coming into the year because of KP and Okongwu in the front court and all this depth and everything would still be there. But again, the ceiling would be raised, just like with that Minnesota scenario, because in theory, Anthony Davis is a significant upgrade over someone like Kristaps Porzingis. The problem is, again, just like with the San Antonio thing, you're giving up a bunch of pieces, and I'm not really sure where the value there is for Dallas, because they're not just going to give away Anthony Davis. They might as well just keep him if they're just going to have to absolutely give him away. So if you're just looking at maybe a pick or two picks plus some contracts, that's going to be tough. The other thing would be, not super realistic, but fun to talk about. What if the Mavs just called Atlanta and said, hey, you can have Anthony Davis. We would like Trae Young. That's it. Nothing else added to the trade, no picks, no nothing. Let's just do Anthony Davis for Trae Young straight up. Theoretically, that would allow Dallas to have a piece around Cooper Flagg to build around. He does need a new contract, which would obviously be an issue. It's been an issue in Atlanta, but that's something you can deal with. Obviously, he's much younger. He helps you in the backcourt. You have this team around him that could potentially insulate Trae Young really well defensively, whereas Atlanta doesn't upgrade the KP spot, but definitely gets better in the front court, and maybe you can build around someone like Jalen Johnson. You've got Dyson Daniels. You've got Risa Shea. Obviously, losing Trae hurts your offense a ton, but maybe it would be semi-interesting if they're just thinking, hey, we're not super interested in keeping Trae Young. He's going to leave in the offseason anyway. Let's try and go out and get Anthony Davis. Not super realistic, but still fun to talk about. Now, one of the other teams that's going to come up a lot is the Detroit Pistons. We talked about them with the Lowry Markkanen and stuff, and they are at least semi-interesting here for Anthony Davis. I don't super understand the front court fit, but let's just talk about the trade first. So it would be some combination of, I just kind of put all the assets on the screen. I don't know if this is necessarily what Detroit would be willing to trade away, but it's just kind of what you could work with, right? You would have Tobias Harris, who's the big expiring that's included in all of these trades for Detroit, whether it be Lowry Markkanen or otherwise. Isaiah Stewart, because like you've got AD, you've got Jalen Duren. Do you also need Isaiah Stewart? Probably not. Jaden Ivey, of course, is another asset there, even though he's dealing with some injury stuff. And then a pick. Some combination of that could potentially get you someone like Anthony Davis. And for a Detroit team that's playing really well, sees themselves as Eastern Conference contenders in a weak Eastern Conference, having Anthony Davis would obviously raise their ceiling this season, whereas Dallas gets back some kind of assets, a front court guy in Isaiah Stewart, although they definitely don't need any more bigs, Jaden Ivey, who could potentially be a piece for them, salary relief in the form of Tobias Harris, maybe you can flip him elsewhere, and you get the pick. The problem with this, and I've seen the Pistons thrown around a lot, is twofold. One, neither of these teams need any more bigs. The Pistons have Jalen Duren, and they have Isaiah Stewart, and the Mavs have Derek Lively and Anthony Davis and Daniel Gafford. And so when it comes to matching contracts, making things work in the front court for each team, most of those guys don't really shoot. Isaiah Stewart can shoot a little bit. AD shoots like 18 footers, but isn't great from three. Those pieces all trying to fit together is just very, very odd to me, because if I'm Detroit, I'm not trading Jalen Duren. He looks awesome. So I guess we're trading you Isaiah Stewart because we don't really need to play all three of those guys, although I guess technically we could, but Stewart's contract works really well in these discussions. And if I'm Dallas, I don't want Isaiah Stewart. I've got Daniel Gafford. I've got Derek Lively, unless I'm trading Gafford elsewhere. It just gets very complicated in terms of the fit in the front court, not to mention in terms of value. I'm not sure Detroit's willing to give up a ton because their team is already really, really good, and it doesn't leave Dallas with a lot to try and build around Cooper Flagg with. So Detroit, although theoretically it makes sense to upgrade this team that looks really good to start the year with someone like Anthony Davis at the 5, in practice, it's actually much more difficult to make work. Another team that comes up a lot anytime there's a star-superstar trade possibility here, if you consider Anthony Davis still to be that, is the Miami Heat. The problem with Miami is the problem that continues to come up with all of these different teams, and that is matching the $50-something million salary of Anthony Davis without giving up half of your rotation. Anthony Davis is not worth most of the players around the league that are making similar salary to him, so you got to put a bunch of guys together. In Miami's case, they've got just the giant contract of Terry Rozier, who I'm not even sure is like eligible to be traded at this point. I'm not sure how that works, but let's just say that that's how that works. Jovic, like, would you be willing to trade Khalil Ware? Even if you were, you're still a ways away from matching salary, and there's a bunch of guys in this roster you obviously wouldn't want to trade. Andrew Wiggins is like weirdly essential to the Miami Heat. They don't want to trade him in exchange for Anthony Davis. Khalil Ware is someone that I would try to hold on to, obviously, if I'm Miami. The front court combination of Bam and AD is cool in theory, but you've really got to figure out, how the spacing there is going to work, although Bam's got better at that. I don't see how it works for Miami because this is a crazy sentence. Like, I'm not trading Andrew Wiggins in a trade package for Anthony Davis if I'm Miami. I can't believe those words are coming out of my mouth, but like, if I need to use him and a bunch of other stuff just to match salaries, it's just an automatic no for me if I'm Miami. Like, Norm Powell staying, Andrew Wiggins staying. Their team is good, and I'm just not ruining that for Anthony Davis. Let's stay in the Eastern Conference here. The Toronto Raptors, who always just seem to be involved in these kinds of moves. Like, they traded for RJ Barrett. They traded for Emmanuel Quickley. They traded for Brandon Ingram. They traded away Jakob Poeltl and then traded back for him. So what if Toronto is like, you know what? We want to upgrade the Jakob Poeltl spot. Let's trade for Anthony Davis. In that scenario, you'd need a third team because Dallas doesn't, like, what does Dallas want with Jakob Poeltl? We're trying to build around Cooper Flagg. We don't need Jakob Poeltl or anything. So you send Jakob Poeltl to Orlando, who I think could use an upgrade of the 5 spot. They've just been kind of doing the, like, Wendell Carter thing for years. I'm not particularly sure that he's all that good. So you upgrade that spot if you're Orlando. And the Mavericks get RJ Barrett, Wendell Carter Jr., and Jet Howard. And we call it a day. No picks, no nothing. And really, if I'm Toronto, I don't super want to give up RJ Barrett, but you got to give up somebody, one of those guys that's making a ton of money. It's not going to be Scotty Barnes. Brandon Ingram's been pretty good. RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley. I don't think Quickley has like a ton of value. And then Poeltl is one of the guys you're already trading away. So if you're going to make it work for Anthony Davis salary-wise, it's got to be one of those guys. And I just landed on RJ Barrett because I think that actually has a good amount of value to Dallas. He's like 25, 26 years old, someone that can still really be part of kind of the Cooper Flagg era there in Dallas. Maybe you can make something out of Wendell Carter Jr., Jet Howard, although the Magic declined his option, could be a good shooter and a spacer for you potentially moving forward. This, to me, would be realistic in a sense of Toronto's just always kind of making some of these weird moves, taking big salaries and just putting together a team that's like maybe pretty good, but we're not really sure. So I would put Toronto in there as like a potential wild card. A couple of other teams that I think people are going to mention, maybe just out of fun. One would be the Clippers. They are a disaster. They've got a bunch of old guys that are always hurt. They don't really have anything that Dallas would want except for maybe Zubats, but again, they don't need any bigs. And salary-wise, it's just basically impossible to get the Anthony Davis thing to work with the Clippers. And then the other would be the LA Lakers. I wonder if they still have Rob Pelinka's number. Do they have it blocked? But you could theoretically, if you wanted to, do something we've mentioned with a lot of these other teams, which is put together a whole bunch of salaries, like half of your rotation, and some assets, and potentially trade back for Anthony Davis. Obviously, it's not all that realistic, but it would just be funny to see like LeBron, Austin Reeves, Luka, and Anthony Davis. I'm sure a bunch of you were saying, oh, well, Austin Reeves has to be in the deal if the Lakers are going to trade for Anthony Davis. Well, then they're not trading for Anthony Davis because they're not trading away Austin Reeves. I wouldn't do Austin Reeves straight up 1-for-1 right now in exchange for Anthony Davis. I just wouldn't. Even with his impending free agency, I just wouldn't do it. So it would have to be this kind of a deal. But I think ultimately, I genuinely looked through every single team. I tried to find a trade for every single team. And I think at this point, it's just too difficult because you're always worried about the injury stuff. If AD comes back and is really good towards the trade deadline, I could see Detroit or San Antonio or Minnesota, one of those trade, or Toronto, one of those trade proposals I could see as realistic as we get closer to the deadline. But the biggest thing, and I mentioned it earlier, the biggest, apart from salary and injury, the on-the-court stuff, the biggest issue here, the hardest thing that the Mavs are going to have to overcome in trading Anthony Davis is the difference between what they're going to get and what they gave away. And obviously, it's easier to get over that difference now that they're going to potentially put someone else in charge. That person isn't Nico Harrison, that isn't connected to that deal, but it's still something that I think is going to be the biggest hurdle to trading Anthony Davis.